Good morning, everybody. How's it going? Hey, I was just about to get into my morning workout here in my home gym. This is my home gym, the Move Now University layer. If you've seen one of these before, you've seen a belt squat. You get a belt squat. Anyway, wanted to show you something that we cover inside of our program, inside of Move Now University, inside of part of our movement assessment. We go through why do someone's arms fall when they're doing an overhead deep squat? Why can't your patient get into complete arm flexion? What is limiting in them, and what is the thought process? And it's a little more in-depth than what a lot of the, just foam roll everything people out there like to tell you. So anyway, as chiropractors, you guys and gals can all understand this more in depth. We should understand this. First off, just a little caveat I'll say before I jump into this. This is inside of our Move Now University platform. It's our level 3 movement assessment. We call it the Move All 3, level 3. We go through the overhead deep squat. We talk about these 5 functional faults, so the 5 things that can go wrong when you're doing an overhead deep squat, 5 things you're looking for in your patients in detail. Arms fall, shoulders shrug, anterior pelvic tilt, knees valgus collapse, sometimes even bow out, and then feet flatten or turn out, externally rotate. So anyway, I'm going to break down the first functional fault, which is arms fall. But before I jump into this, if you haven't already and you're wanting to check out how all this stuff comes together in practice, how do you actually do this in a chiropractic practice, how do you get your patients to care about it and actually value it and want to pay for it, and how do you just deepen what you do in your practice, in your community, and make you stand out? That's what we teach inside of Move Now University in our platform, and you can watch a demo that we made. It's a 30-minute pre-recorded demo. Go to demo.movenowU.com. You can watch the demo, and then if it piques your interest, you want to jump on a phone call, jump on a call with either me or Vlad or Brandy. We have a couple people now that are jumping on calls because we are talking with doctors pretty much 5 or 6 days a week. So there's a lot of interest in this, which is great. And this is like the best time to do it because 2020 is right around the corner. So if you want to get your practice launched into this better direction, which I'm biased obviously, but I think addressing movement, functional movement, and giving what your patients really need and want, do that for 2020. Instead of putting all of your eggs in the basket of figuring out all the just marketing, think about what can you do clinically to improve what you're doing internally and then tie that into your marketing, because now you have a different message because you have different positioning. So I've always been about having higher level of results and clinical expertise and being able to talk about that for your marketing versus just offering some kind of deal as far as when you're either trying to build your practice or build it up for an associate doctor or whatever. So anyway, with that said, overhead deep squat, and I'm going to run through the thought process for arms fall. All right, and hopefully everyone can hear me okay here, so if you have any problems hearing me, let me know. I tried doing this a little earlier with a Mevo camera, and the thing just was not working, so now I'm just back to the iPhone on Facebook Live. So, Move All 3, Level 3, arms fall. There's these different thought processes. There's 6 different thought processes. I know you can't see this bottom one. I'll pick this up when we get there for the very bottom. All right, maybe I can just move my camera down. That'd be cool too, right? Let's just do that. All right. Got to be smarter than the camera. There we go. Okay. So here's how this works. If your patient is doing an overhead deep squat and you're analyzing their arms overhead, or if you just want to analyze their shoulder flexion, have them back up into a wall and just have them try to lift their arms up overhead and see if they can lift their arms up into flexion. What's the thought process of maybe why they can't achieve full flexion? Which is a problem because that's a normal movement pattern that we should all be able to do, and especially if your patients are doing any overhead lifting exercises, especially if they're jumping into like CrossFit type classes, doing something where they're doing like overhead loaded deep squats. You better believe they should be able to get into full flexion before they're loading that pattern. So here's the first thought process. Is their inability to get the arm overhead a problem with a joint? Okay, which is what we really specialize in as chiropractors, right? Is it a joint? Is it a muscular issue? Or is it a motor control issue, brain issue? Is it joint, muscle, or brain? In this whole breakout here that we're going to talk about is really assuming that it's muscular. Because if it's a joint, that takes us down a slightly different road. There's things we can do with adjusting a shoulder joint. There's things with posterior shoulder capsule release type of techniques, which works on really the soft tissue around the joint. If it's a motor control issue, you're not going to have any sort of restrictions that you find when you're going through various muscle tissue testing. So let's just assume it's muscle. So thought number 2 now. We've identified it's muscle. Which mobility restriction is present? So if they can't bring their arm overhead, what is that? That means as your arm comes overhead, the arm has to externally rotate. So external rotation is not happening. So it's flexion, external rotation. Why is external rotation not happening? That's the main movement typically that limits someone from overhead, is the external rotation as they come into flexion. Couple thought processes is you could say, are the internal rotators, are they overactive? Are they tight? Are they shortened? Let's talk about shortened first off. If someone's posture is in this, forward shoulder, forward head translation, thoracic hyperkyphosis posture, where they just have poor posture, they have like an upper crust syndrome, they're going to have an extremely tight pec minor, sometimes even pec major. They're going to have tightness in the traps, weakness in the rhomboids, weakness in the deep neck flexors. All those things are going to hold this internally rotated position. Okay? So, posturally, things could be adaptively shortened because of an abnormal posture. That's one thing. That could lead to things being tight. They could be overactive in that position. Maybe someone's doing a lot of work in front of their body and they're constantly working those internal rotators because the arms are in front of them. They're not opening themselves up into external rotation, which is like pretty much everyone. Either way, this is the thought process, is internal rotation is probably overactive, tight, and shortened. But you have to go through and test that. You can't just assume. So which internal rotators are going to be tight and overactive? That's the next thought process, because there's really 3 main ones on top of pec, all right? But let's not think about pec right now, because pec really brings the entire shoulder girdle forward. We're going to talk about what's going on with these 3, teres major, subscapularis, and lat. There is a test that we do where we differentially diagnose these tissues called the lat length test, where a patient is laying face up on a table and you basically go through this process of, like I said, differentially diagnosing which tissues are responsible for this issue. So let's go through and just explain that process of because like for the sake of right now, since I'm on a mic and I'm on my camera and I don't have another person here, I can't really show you a lat length test, but I can link a video or something below and show you what a lat length test looks like. We have videos inside of our program where we demonstrate all of this stuff. But let's just go back to this thought process, because this same thought process is how I want you to think about different movement dysfunctions, is going through, is a joint muscle brain, which mobility restriction is present, so which thing can they not do, what then is the opposing muscle tissue, like internal rotators are overactive because they can't externally rotate, and then which internal rotators now identify the anatomy. We have teres major, subscap, and lat. How do you differentiate those, or are you just going to work on all 3? Well, in this case, we're going to differentiate them. How are we going to do that? We're going to do a lat length test. Okay, number 4. So opposing joint action muscles. So now let's say that you figured out in the lat length test which muscles are responsible for this problem. Let's say lat is not a problem, but it's teres major and subscapularis, which, truth be told, we usually group these 2 together. Teres major and subscapularis are usually grouped together because the protocols that we use for those are usually pretty close to the same. It's very similar tissue and location. Lat, though, works a little bit differently. In the lat length test, you can rule out lat, so you don't have to do unnecessary protocols, and you can actually get straight to the root cause of the problem. Let's say the problem is teres major and subscap. Lat's not a problem. Now you still go on to number 4. The question is, what are the opposing joint action muscles? So the opposing joint action in this case if we say we have overactive internal rotation, the overactive internal rotation is preventing the person from externally rotating, which is affecting them from getting into flexion and external rotation, so the arm cannot get overhead. Now you have to say, what muscles are the ones that actually bring someone into external rotation? The teres minor and the infraspinatus are the two that are really most responsible for external rotation of the upper arm. That's part of our rotator cuff, right? Part of the sits muscles. Now, here's the reality. Most people are weak in their teres minor and infraspinatus, and I'm going to get to that in a second, but there's other muscle tissue that takes over to try to accomplish external rotation and doesn't do as good of a job and doesn't stabilize the head of the humerus nearly as well as these do because they're part of the rotator cuff. So point number 4 here is the opposing joint action muscles of the teres minor and infraspinatus. So I wonder if those muscles are doing their job. I wonder if they're actually bringing the arm into external rotation. Maybe it's a problem where those muscles are weak. So number 5, are the opposing joint action muscles weak? There you go, there's a test. And it says external rotation test. So now we bring the arms in front of us. We go through a couple of different things with our patient to shut off the delt, the rear delt. Okay, so we try to reciprocally inhibit the muscles that want to take over, which are called overactive synergists. So there's some positional things that we set our patient in prior to testing, and then we're having them externally rotate against resistance, and we're checking all different ranges of motion in a concentric and eccentric fashion to see if there's any weakness along that range that can be trained out so that that person can regain that full muscular control and strength and then start to actually add repetitions and load so we can start to strengthen them again. So there's a special way to test that that's more reliable than a lot of the tests I've seen out there, and you can do it bilaterally. So you can do it at the same time, so you can compare right to left. So let's say we go through and we test the external rotation and we find out that the person is weak in the last 15, 20 degrees of range of motion. Now we know that exercise-wise, you better make sure that person is getting to that last 15, 20 degrees of range of motion when they're doing this against load, because if they're just going through banded external rotation and they're not reaching full range of motion, now it becomes a little bit of a motor control issue as well, where their brain is not used to experiencing that end range of motion. They may have a muscular weakness in that end range of motion. The muscle as a whole might be strong when you test it from here, but when you test it from here is extremely weak. You want to increase strength throughout the entire range, knowing it's not going to be the same through the entire range, but knowing that end range is normally where people fall flat on their face, and you want to make sure that you're improving some of that strength at the final range of external rotation. So anyway, we test external rotation, and then down here, point number 6, let me move the camera down a little bit just so you can see that, just to make sure we don't miss this. Thought process number 6 is, what are the overactive synergists that might be making it hard neurologically for the main movers, the main external rotators, okay, which is teres minor and infraspinatus? What overactive synergists might be taking over and then making it really easy for these two to fall asleep at the wheel, and also make it very, very hard to activate these muscles, because every time you go through an exercise, the overactive synergist just takes over? Well, in this case, the posterior delt and the posterior shoulder capsule are both of the structures. One is the posterior delt is what takes over in the motion, and the posterior shoulder capsule is not contractile tissue, but it's a dense tissue that gets very, very gummed up and firm and just limits mobility. Okay. So how do you go through and start fixing this once you find it? So let's say that someone can't get into full shoulder flexion and external rotation, so they can't bring their arm vertical overhead. You've gone through all this stuff. You say, okay, it's not their lat. Their lat is not tight. It's their teres major and subscapularis. So we go through some foam rolling and some lacrosse ball and maybe some manual, active release type stuff and vibration, and we get those muscle tissues a little bit toned down so that they at least have elongation. They are desensitized to this full contraction maybe even painful. And so all of that is now getting toned down from those techniques. Now, the next thing, though, that we do, and I know I'm running through this again, but I'm giving you just kind of a quicker thought process, is now let's look at the opposing muscles that cause the arm to externally rotate, make sure that those are doing their job and those are strong. If those are weak, let's strengthen them. In what range of motion are they weak? Let's test it. But before we do that, before we actually start to get those muscles working, you have to check the overactive synergists, because if you don't and you start going through these exercises, these muscles aren't going to get any of the work at all. The overactive synergists are just going to take over, and then you're not going to really accomplish much of anything except for make the overactive synergists more overactive, like more posterior delt tightness, more stiffness in the posterior shoulder capsule, and now that person's usually going to have posterior shoulder pain and they can't flex and externally rotate their arms overhead. So that's like you're failing on a couple of different levels. So that's why you have to think about this thought process as you go through fixing someone's movement. I'm using the overhead deep squat because it's part of a level 3 movement test that we teach, meaning we have a level 1 and we have a level 2, which is what we do with all of our patients. The level 3 we do with our more exceptional patients once we started to fix some of their major issues on level 1, level 2. And again, there's arms fall, shoulders shrug, anterior pelvic tilt, knees collapse, valgus collapse, and feet flatten or turn out. And there's many more of these that we did. These are actually some of the different drawings that we did that are inside of our Move Now University program for anterior pelvic tilt. There's a lot of stuff there. And then all of this, what we did is I made these flow charts that are inside of a program online that's a lot cleaner and a lot easier to follow than this. This is just how my brain works starting off. I like to draw and put it on paper. That's how I better understand this stuff myself. Then we make trainings and all of this. Then we also have this in a much easier to read platform that we have online. And then those things are printed out, laminated, and those are there so you can quickly reference them, so you don't have to memorize every single little thing until you've gone through it multiple times, whether it's you or your exercise team doing this. The way that we teach this inside of Move Now University can be done a couple different ways. Either you can do this yourself, or you can have a trained exercise therapist that takes your patients through this, and just the advanced testing stuff you as the doctor are doing, but the more easier, redundant stuff, teaching the simplistic protocols, because really none of the protocols are difficult, but it's just knowing what to assign for what patient so that you have specific implementation or specific intervention based on what the patient actually has. All of that stuff can be taught to an exercise therapist. I've taught multiple in my own clinic, and they do a fantastic job at it, and patients get great results. So it's really cool because me as the chiropractor, I can spend the majority of my time checking and adjusting patients and putting together their clinical care and not having to go through this stuff myself if I don't want to. But there's other days where I have more time and I do want to, and I enjoy jumping in there, getting my hands dirty too. So anyway, with that said, hope you enjoyed this. Share this, comment, ask questions if you like. Let me know what you want to see more of. I'm going to plan to go through all of these functional faults and do little breakout videos just like this. We have these more detailed inside of our program, but I want to give you a sneak peek here on Facebook Live, or whether you're listening to this on a replay on a podcast. And if you are on a podcast, you don't have all the visuals, so bear with me. It might be kind of hard to follow without all the visuals. But either way, if you haven't seen the demo, go to demo.movenowu.com. Check that out. We look forward to connecting with you, and you can just click a button below and schedule a call with us. We'll jump on a call. We'll let you know if we think this is going to be a good fit for you and your clinic. We'll answer questions on how you can start implementing this, how many staff, how it's going to work, the square footage, like all the questions that people normally have is answered in the demo, but they like to ask some more questions too, is what we found, to get the peace of mind to either rule themselves in or out of whether or not this is going to be a good choice for them moving forward. And then this is the best timing right now so that you can get this implemented early 2020. So have a great day. We'll talk to you soon, and I'll be back on probably later today.